Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Jhabhaskar. India, along with Pakistan, assumed full membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The two countries became 7th and 8th members of the SCO after China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. India was admitted into the SCO as an observer at the 2005 Astana Summit along with Iran and Pakistan. So the 2010 Tashkent Summit lifted the moratorium on new membership. India's role in the grouping had remained a marginal one in the past.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address at the annual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the Kazakh capital, called for coordinated efforts among members to fight terrorism and enhance connectivity without impinging upon sovereignty and territorial integrity. He said that India's entry into the bloc will give a new momentum to the grouping in dealing with terrorism.
आतंकवाद मानव अधिकारों तथा मानव मूल्यों के सबसे बड़े उल्लंघनकारियों में से एक है। अतः आतंकवाद तथा अतिवाद के खिलाफ संघर्ष एससीओ के सहयोग का अहम भाग है। मुद्दा चाहे रेडिकलाइजेशन का हो, टेररिस्ट की रिक्रूटमेंट का, उनकी ट्रेनिंग का अथवा फाइनेंसिंग का, जब तक हम सभी देश मिलकर इस दिशा में कोऑर्डिनेटेड तथा सशक्त एफर्ट्स नहीं करेंगे, तब तक इन समस्याओं का समाधान असंभव है। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि भारत एससीओ सहयोग आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई को एक नई दिशा तथा शक्ति प्रदान करेगा। क्षेत्रीय परिप्रेक्ष्य में अफगानिस्तान में शांति तथा स्थिरता भी एससीओ के प्रयासों से लाभ उठा सकती है। वैश्विक संदर्भ में पर्यावरण बदलाव की समस्या पर भी एससीओ अपना ध्यान केंद्रित कर सकता है।
Prime Minister Modi said that connectivity in the region is key to boosting trade and investment. Prime Minister's remarks assumed significance as India boycotted the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, where 29 world leaders participated to highlight its concerns over the $50 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor, which passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Prime Minister Modi said the SCO will help in bringing peace in war-torn Afghanistan, adding the bloc must also work to fight climate change. Clearly, through SCO membership, India will now boost its presence in Central Asia, as well as find new partners in its fight against terrorism.
Right, and joining us on the program today, very esteemed guest, former Ambassador Shilkant Sharma. Thanks very much, Ambassador Sharma, for joining us in this program. Also, former Director, United Nations, Mukul Sanwal. Thanks very much, Ambassador Sanwal, for joining us in this program. Senior International Affairs Journalist, Smita Sharma. Thanks very much, ma'am, for joining us in this program. Questions we are asking today in this particular segment. What is the significance of inclusion of India and Pakistan in Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Is this related to the varying dynamic between the two dominant nations, Russia and China? Is Russia losing influence in the SCO as China's economic might in Central and South Asia is increasing? What is the big message of this expansion of SCO? Is SCO leading an alternative to Western institutions? Is that the reason that both China and Russia want to bring a wider range of countries into a single forum? Will SCO become India's gateway to Central Asia, and what are the risks of India-Pakistan joining the SCO? And getting straight into the discussion now, Ambassador Sharma, what is really the significance of inclusion of India and Pakistan in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
I think I would just quote from the joint statement between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi when he visited him in St. Petersburg in the declaration. And there Russia says that India's joining the SCO will improve its international profile. So this is how they see, the members of SCO see India's joining as something which is adding to its status, its standing in the world, because India brings with it a huge democracy and an economy and something which is always an value addition. It doesn't bring any baggage with it. So that's what India brings to SCO. As for Pakistan, I feel as a conditioned diplomat,
Right.
Putting the two together in your question, I find worth a mild protest, because Pakistan belongs to a different category. and it is coming there not out of its own steam, but coming it because of China's prodding. Because had it been on its own, then it would have also entered other organizations.
Now, so Ambassador Sharma, if I can just intervene there, you mentioned two important points. First, of course, is that improving the standing of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Why it took SCO so long to include India? Let's not forget, India actually, was included as an observer in 2005. We have waited for quite a long time in terms of changing the rules of the game. The very fact of memorandum of obligation also took a substantial time. What really stopped the SCO to include India, at a faster pace? Why India waited for a long time?
Oh, well, these are international organizations, they have procedures. Basically, it's a kind of a glass house always, which diplomats of multiple countries create. So they have a tendency to do a lot of bureaucracy. This whole SCO procedures is a wrangle, it's a big, it's a forest. So they've been through 27 kind of processes which have been through. So, and then in 2010 they agreed to let members join. Till then there was no, so there was an embargo on new membership. Now let's not forget, this is an organization which is gaining some stature. This is the only organization which doesn't have the USA anywhere. And when it started in the early part of last decade, there were stories that maybe US would join, but the Chinese and the Russians were not in favor of that.
Right.
And so this is a kind of a different ball game, which is where India and Pakistan, if they have any commonality, it is the Gilgit, which belongs to us after partition, but Pakistan occupied it unauthorizedly. And Gilgit is a point where Central Asia, China, India, Afghanistan, they meet. So there is a certain geographical...
Okay, we'll talk about the challenges and opportunities also of India and Pakistan's inclusion in the SCO, but bringing you Ambassador Sanwal here, the fact this is the first ever expansion of 6-member Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and a new SCO member had to fulfill 8 rules. India and Pakistan had to sign around 38 agreements to fulfill the formalities for SCO membership. What took SCO so long to include India?
You see, two things. I think we need to look at this in a different context. One is that India has traditionally been wary of joining institutions other than the United Nations organizations. Even when ASEAN first asked us to join, we were not enthusiastic, we did not join. Similarly, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we have not been very forthcoming right in the very beginning. Even the BNR initiative of China, Prime Minister Modi was not there. That's one background. But then India is now recognizing that with the United States gradually withdrawing, or the rise of India in a sense as a global power with the potential to be a global power, they had for some time now. India has also been changing its approach to these organizations which are not United Nations based. And then of course you have the factor of Russia, which has been a close ally in a sense too, where the Shanghai Cooperation Organization initially expanded into Central Asia and came into direct contact or clash, one might say, with the institutions that Russia had built up after the demise of the Soviet Union, the economic cooperation organizations there. But China has become the major trading partner of the Central Asian countries, and that is making them gravitate towards China. For example, Turkmenistan's 3/4 of their exports go to China, that is largely gas and natural resources. So Russia reluctantly agreed to the expansion of Chinese influence in this area. So it's in Russia's interest to counterbalance that with India, in a sense. But the fact of the matter is that China already has has gas pipelines, wants to connect Central Asia to Europe and to the Chinese mainland as economic opportunities as part of the BNR initiative. So these countries are gravitating towards China in a very big, in a significant manner, and Russia is accepting this because of the economic imperatives. But then we must also not forget that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is more than just security. It's also political and economic undertones. And in a sense, it challenges the American built systems of security, economics and polity in Asia. And as Ambassador just told us, this is along with the Asia Investment Bank the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the second institution where the United States is not a full member.
Right, and many experts also believe, they call SCO as the response towards the Western NATO. So, if one has to understand the very creation of Shanghai Cooperation, you mentioned as a defense regional bloc, but it's slowly shifting towards greater trade ties, economic ties?
Yeah, greater economic ties, but not military alliances in the NATO sense. But yes, they have terrorism as a central focus. And I think that is a very important factor that is in our favor in joining an organization like this, because the declaration there specifically says that they should push the UN Convention on the, combating terrorism.
What is really the big message of the expansion of the SCO? Is Russia really losing influence? So I mentioned about the economic might of China increasing, not just in South Asia and Southeast Asia, but also in the Central Asia. What is really the big message of this particular expansion?
Well, look, there are, of course, others. This is a multi-layered process and a multi-layered, in fact, context that we need to understand, which both the ambassadors pointed out to. At the end of the day, post the American invasion of Afghanistan, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, SCO got its act together in 2002, came up more like a security alliance to try and resist that American presence in Afghanistan, in Central Asia. As far as Russia and China go, both these countries today, we see them on a lot of issues coming together, on a lot of multiple, in fact, institutions and forums coming together. But people who understand this relationship know that this is not a natural alliance, really. This is more like a forced, opportunistic marriage, where in a lot of areas, of course, their interests meet. And the ambassadors are right in pointing out that the Russians have been wary of the Chinese presence in Central Asia, because at the end of the day, they do think of the larger Central Asia as being something which was a part of them. So they would want, the Chinese effect to be balanced by a heavyweight, say, like India. But it is a security alliance. Of course, this represents 60% of the Eurasian landmass. So for India, if maritime ocean boundaries are important, this is another area where India has key interests, which is why we saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi undertake the visit to the 5 sthanas, just a year back, though we still are yet to see the visible outcomes from that visit. But India has, of course, interests, is a big player in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan has been in turmoil. As far as Pakistan is concerned, that has been blocking our land access to Central Asia. So for India also, this SCO membership is important if India is wanting to be a player with the energy and the trade connectivity in this region.
Right, so enhancing connectivity and economic cooperation simultaneously, and that has been the focus of the Prime Minister even when he visited all these Central Asian nations back in 2015. My question also with what is really the message by including Pakistan? Because do we see some sort of a geopolitical balancing here? On one side, China backing Pakistan in SCO and Russia backing India in SCO. What are we actually trying to do? Because let's not forget, there are going to be many risks also with India, Pakistan together in the SCO. What it does to the major agreements,
Look, this is going to be a tricky area for a country like India also to charter. And Ambassador Sharma, in fact, has rightly pointed out that the reasons why India and Pakistan have been included are different. Pakistan, at the end of the day today, has been playing second fiddle to China on most issues, which is interesting because still in the recent past, we saw that China was actually the eyes and ears for America into China. So it was Pakistan that sort of brought about that meeting, if you remember, if we are talking about the American-Chinese, the Mao meeting. So. But now the situation has changed, the dynamics have changed. What the questions will be when India and Pakistan come together, of course, is SCO is not a bloc that is based on geographical alliances like a SARC or cultural alliances. And there, of course, Pakistan will have a very solid support of China. The 5 stans that we are talking about, they are more than happy to be a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is going to be a major contention for India. How does India reconcile its differences on sovereignty issues with BRI? Because the SCO endorses this. And if India tries to pull out, say, something like a SARC, where it tried isolating Pakistan with success on the issue of terrorism, that's not something that we'll see reflected.
And paradoxically and practically, all the leaders of states, of different states actually spoke about the Border and Road Initiative, even in the SCO Summit, barring Prime Minister. I'll come back to you, Ambassador Sanwal. Okay.
One sentence. But the declaration also says that the BNR will be in accordance with the UN Charter. And that speaks of sovereignty. So I think we should keep that in balance too.
Right. So SCO, which began with a security focus today has expanded into trade and connectivity also. But is SCO really a response, an alternative to Western institutions? Clearly, when Russia and China are trying to include new players in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what this really means and what are really the big takeaways of SCO Summit 2017? We'll try and explore on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. Our focus in this segment is on India-Central Asia ties. Will SCO become India's gateway to Central Asia?
Capping a 2-year-long process, India and Pakistan became full members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. India's membership was strongly pushed by Russia, while Pakistan's entry into the grouping was backed by China. With the expansion of the grouping, the SCO will now represent 40% of humanity and nearly 20% of the global GDP. It is believed that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will play a valuable role in promoting mutual understanding, dialogue, stability and development across much of Eurasia. China-dominated security grouping, SCO, is increasingly seen as a counterweight to NATO. As an SCO member now, India is expected to have a bigger say in pressing for concerted action in dealing with terrorism.
Right, so SCO will represent over 40% of humanity and nearly 20% of the global GDP. Coming back to you, Ambassador Sharma, is SCO really leading an alternative to Western institutions? The fact that China and Russia want to bring in a range of other countries also with the inclusion of India and Pakistan. Are we going to see further expansion of SCO?
It is likely that they might get Iran also. And Afghanistan is an important player, in the sense that it's one of the problems of for SCO. When they mention SCO, they mention terrorism, Afghanistan, solution of the problem in Afghanistan. So that's another area. But I'd like to mention two things. One is that it is wrong to say that India has been keeping out. Ever since we started on liberalization 91 onwards, we have been looking out, and we started connecting with wherever we could do. So we started Indian Ocean Rim Organization, we started working with ASEAN, we started knocking at the door of APEC, and we began the ARF, the Asia Regional Forum. So throughout the past 25 years, India has been moving out. That previous Cold War phase was given up long back. So it is not correct to say that India is keeping itself closed in, not at all. In every way we are open. Even this SCO, when 2001, 2002 it was coming up, India is already in touch with China and Russia. We used to have a trilateral dialogue, which still continues, which has a summit also due, you know. So India was working closely with China and Russia and on a trilateral dimension. So it was very natural for us that something which is being created in the Central Asian region, India would join. So, and it is not, at no point did India had any qualms about joining SCO. We were always open to it because during the Soviet Union's era, we had a very natural connection with all of these stans, and we had experience of dealing with them, language and a lot of things. So it was a natural expansion of India's diplomatic profile if we were to work.
Now, what in your opinion, Ambassador Sharma, was the biggest takeaway of SCO Summit 2017? The fact that India talked about concerted fight on terrorism, all the countries must come together, and all this while we have raised this issue of diplomatic isolation of Pakistan. Do you really feel that the countries are together as far as this global fight against terrorism is concerned?
The diplomatic isolation of Pakistan we are not bringing in here.
We did not, but overall, concerted fight on terrorism.
Overall, this kind of an organization is always seen as a process. It is not, at no point have you completed something. So this is an important phase that you have transited now. We have become a full member. But now you have to work. It has many things. The kitty is very big. It has joint military exercises. It has economic cooperation. It has global issues. So, and on each of them, we have a certain view, which Prime Minister in his statement very succinctly pointed out. So, we have to work on all these things, and then with the, this is one unique thing about SCO is that this is the only international organization outside the UN where India is a full member, where there are 2 permanent members of the United Nations Security Councils also member. Otherwise, we don't have any other organization where of this kind, you know. We have large organizations like ARF, for instance, where Russia, China, America and EU are members.
Or BRICS.
Or we have BRICS, which has which are Russia is the only member of the Security Council.
Okay. Ambassador Sanwal, will SCO really become India's gateway to Central Asia?
No, yes, it will, because we have no direct, we don't have a boundary with Central Asia. And it is very rich in resources. They have enough gas to supply both China and us. And the key factor there is that earlier their only access to the outside world was through Russia, or Soviet Union, the gas pipelines, the roads, the electricity networks, the roads. And India is now working in Chabar to also connect with the Central Asians, bypassing Afghanistan in a sense. And there has been talk of a gas pipeline through Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. But I think the key issue here is not economic, but more security or terrorism related. What happened is that the Astana Declaration introduces, I think, 3 important points which are of great significance for India. Firstly, it talks about the BNR in the context of the UN Charter. So that takes care of our sovereignty interests, and I think it takes care of our sovereign interests in a more effective manner than our raising it, because the UN Charter is something which all countries have subscribed to. The second issue is that there is a clear statement there that they will push the UN Convention on Terrorism. Now, if we are, and I think we are now, because shifting our focus on dealing with Masood Azhar, instead of getting him declared as a persona non grata in the United Nations, to the Convention on Terrorism, and taking advantage of developments in Europe and America, which are also favoring a Convention on Terrorism now, it is going to be a very significant policy shift. Because just the other day, Ram Madhav, a prominent BJP member, has also spoken in a Chinese think tank meeting in Delhi about the BRICS getting involved with terrorism. So it indicates a policy shift on the part of India, that instead of dealing with on a case-to-case basis, let us move in a concerted way to take advantage of the global situation and agreement on terrorism. The third thing I think very important for us will be that we are sitting, as the ambassador said, on equal footing with members of the Security Council. And as this matures, as this organization matures, it gives us a say, not just in terms of Pakistan, but in a wider context, because the Shanghai Cooperation Organization also has a regional center on terrorism, joint military exercises. Now, I think these are more effective ways of dealing with the cross-border terrorism than seeking diplomatic isolation of Pakistan. So I see this as a major shift in India's policy towards Pakistan and towards this problem of taking a more multilateral route rather than a bilateral route.
Now, there are high goals and high ambitions laid down in terms of what is it that we really want to achieve with our membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But if one has to assess what SCO has achieved since 2001 and what it aims to achieve, can you really draw parallels in terms of other multilateral institutions where SCO stands today? Because there are many who are already drawing comparisons between SCO and BRICS, calling BRICS redundant and SCO emerging as a new torchbearer, where it can show that in which direction the regional politics must move now.
Look, I wouldn't say that's a fair comparison, because at the end of the day, the representations are different. You know, if you're talking about BRICS, you also have a South Africa in it. So it's a different continent that comes into play as well. If you're talking about SCO, really, as we mentioned, that initially the idea was also to be a sort of a counterweight to NATO. It was also about the Eurasian landmass. It was also about resistance to American presence in Central Asia. But of course, as it does happen, when you have, you know, the similar ingredients in a lot of dishes, do the dishes turn out similar, or does it make one dish perhaps a little less spicy than the other one that you're experimenting with? So that kind of a question can crop up. But, you know, I would beg to differ a little bit with Ambassador Mukul Sangwal here, because I think over the last few months, or especially, of course, since the current government has come into power with a very decisive mandate in the country, we've seen a very sort of a specific and a definitive tone and tenor when it comes to dealing with Pakistan.
That's right.
India has not been hesitant, you know, in what it says in conducting surgical strikes. But somewhere perhaps India will have to do a little rethinking, because, you know, if in SAARC you're able to pull your weight with countries like Sri Lanka, with countries like Maldives, who are dependent on you for a lot of financial aid or loans, or Nepal, that's not going to be the case in the SCO. The Sthanas have a different kind of a relationship with China, a different relationship with Russia. We saw India trying to get on board the last BRICS summit, where there is no Pakistan present. Despite that, Russia and China could not come on board with the kind of terrorism definition that India wanted in the joint communique. So, you know, maybe they'll have to focus more on trade.
So what you're saying is that how will you raise stakes higher for other countries who are part of the SCO to fight terrorism? So in terms of, for Sri Lanka and for Maldives, they are getting your support in terms of development assistance, but what about Central Asian nations? So in terms, we'll also have to improve on our bilaterals.
Look, I do think that this does allow a better forum for India and China to talk better. India and Pakistan, you know, through the military exercises which are done in the UN to try and cooperate better. But in terms of energy trade, India is talking about the SABHA project. India is talking about the North-South International Transport Corridor. What will be key is India will have to leverage its strength as a market. Population-wise, India has now overtaken China, is what is being reported. And in terms of deliverables, you know, in projects where India is involved as a front runner without China, is your speed and pace of delivery really good enough? Chinese projects have run into contentious issues, be it in Sri Lanka, be it in Maldives, or be it in Africa. But India has always been very, very slow in any infrastructure project that it gets into. So I guess India will have to focus on trade while it looks at the larger picture of terror, instead of making this a bilateral India-Pakistan shadowboxing institution.
And that has happened with South Asian nations, Southeast Asian nations, be it our ties with Myanmar or be it our ties with Sri Lanka. Hambantota was offered to India before, even our ties on many of our infrastructure projects in Myanmar. So implementation remains a challenge. How India will actually project itself as an opportunity to these nations, how we will improve our ties with many of these Central Asian nations. What India has achieved in the last 2 years, if one has to say about post Prime Minister's visit to all these 5 Central Asian nations, what really came out and how are we really progressing in these in this direction, that remains to be seen. But time now for me to slip into a short break. Next, when we come back, we'll also talk about the China factor in Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The fact that SCO is China dominated. How will this really impact bilateral ties between India and China? We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to your Watching Insight. India earlier had boycotted the 2-day Belt and Road Forum meeting in China, saying connectivity projects must be pursued in a manner that respects sovereignty and territorial integrity. The part of the project passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The OBOR project will be a vast network of sea and land routes across more than 65 countries. It will impact more than 4 billion people. Questions we are asking now: is India-China united on fight against terror? What Shanghai Cooperation Organization has achieved so far as a regional grouping? Was it a right decision by India to boycott OBOR meet? Is OBOR a power play by China? Will India's SCO membership test this equation both with India and Pakistan? Right, so is India-China together as far as its fight against global terror is concerned? Coming back to you, Ambassador Sharma, on this. We've talked about China, and China dominated Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Where do you see India and China together in this fight against terror?
For that, again, you should see the briefing after the meeting of Prime Minister Modi with Xi Jinping. And there it has been said very clearly that China and India both have found enough areas to work together. and they've also said that there are differences, but they don't want them to become disputes. And while India has mentioned its points very carefully, China also has said that they should try and get across their differences properly. So that properly is a word which is in the Chinese lingo probably weighted with a number of other things, what they consider proper and what they consider improper. But the fact is that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its meeting and summit lent a certain leverage on both countries to see the positive side of their cooperation, which the meeting seemed to indicate. And for that, there is enough that they can do together. I think to drag OBOR or BRI into this is also a bit far-fetched, in the sense that Russia has joined the summit. It went and Putin was there in the Chinese thing, but they have been working with us on the North-South corridor, which is a totally different exercise, where Russia, Iran and India can work together. And so there are, this is not the only game in town. Then the declaration mentions, as Mukul mentioned, about a UN Charter, but it also mentioned things like sovereignty. It also mentions inclusiveness and some of these other principles which we have mentioned in the context. Consent, for instance. So, and India and Russia are on the same page as regards this connectivity issues, where in the St. Petersburg Declaration they mention that consent is an important part, and sovereignty is an important part. So, it is not such a free ride for China to just start this. And we, as far as OBOR is concerned, we have made our points very clear, throughout this over the last several months. The point is that if you have such a large thing, then you have to have prior consultations. You cannot just unfurl it like a magician, that here I come, and then want others to come. So that kind of a exercise is what roiled India.
Okay, Ambassador Sanwal, is India and China united on fight against terror? We're talking about Central Asian countries here. Afghanistan, Pakistan stability is equally important. Afghanistan recently also organized Afghan Peace Cooperation Summit, which was attended by leaders of various nations, and simultaneously China's role here, because China, we know, has backed Pakistan in SCO. Where do you see China in the overall fight?
You see, I think there are two issues here. One is that the Chinese, as the largest economy in the world, are now pushing for alternate institutions. The Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the OBOR, BRI, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are part of that grand design. That is clear. It has economic and strategic implications and political implications. That is also clear. But I think what is being underpinned here is something that we tend to ignore. Firstly, China has trading relations as a major trading partner with 100 countries. And countries in this region, Asia, Central Asia, most of their exports, because they are primary producers or imports, are linked with China. So there is a dependency there. Secondly, McKinsey has pointed out that the future world is not about developed and developing countries. It is going to be about how connected countries are. The more connected countries are, the stronger will be their economic growth, and they have projected that it could be as much as 40%. And that is another reason that the countries in the region are gravitating towards the BNRI, because they see it as something accelerating their economic growth. The third issue here is that the nature of this flows, cross-boundary flows, is changing. Today, 40% of components that come to the United States come by air cargo, because these components are electronic, they are pharma, which needs a cold chain, or they are software components. Now, as China seeks to double its per capita GDP, it will go from a 10 to a 20 billion economy, and they are now seeing that instead of air cargo, which a country surrounded by oceans has to rely on. As a continental country, you can rely on high-speed rail.
Right.
So there are strong economic reasons for the connectivity to succeed. And we must remember too that Prime Minister Modi specifically said that connectivity is important at the Astana summit. Now here is a major shift I see from from ignoring connectivity to bringing it up in a very big way. And when you see the joint statements that have come out, actually really the reporting in the press or from the foreign secretary of the Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi's discussions there, they have specifically talked about the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor. Now that is also a part of the OBOR or BRI. But that gives us a gateway to the east and links up with our Look East policy and gives us a gateway to the 3 countries that are the fastest growing countries in Asia,
right.
that
so
is
Bangladesh,
Vietnam and Indonesia.
Connectivity will really define the economic growth of countries in the coming years. But you know, if
that is what is bringing us together in a different way to the policy we had as early as May, where we just ignored the OBRR as not being relevant to our interests or not serving our interests, and now we are all talking about connectivity. We are saying, as Ambassador said earlier, that differences should not become disputes. And that is, I think, a major shift again. He did not refer to Azhar Masood or the NSG membership.
In fact, in the earlier program, you categorically also he stated that if CPEC was such a problem, why was it not raised when Xi Jinping visited
and the Karakoram highway has been there for 2 decades.
Right. So why wasn't it raised earlier? But you know, is OBOR really a power play by China? The main reasons behind OBOR, and was it a right decision by India not to attend this summit?
Look, of course, we've been hearing a lot of sides, and personally one would feel that maybe India could have sent at least a former retired ambassador as an official to be inside the room and be listening into the arguments and presenting your case rather than having boycotted it completely. But India has had its reasons, and India's reasons, while of course that stems from the factor of sovereignty, but the question, the people point out to the Karakoram highway that has been there since the 70s, and you've been living with it. It's there in what Pakistan now calls the Gilgit-Baltistan area. But in OBOR, what I think is where there is an area of opportunity for India is to try and talk to the other players, say a European Union, the European nations who did not sign on to the trade declaration in OBOR at the BRI meet, because as Ambassador, in fact, Sharma pointed out that this needs consultations if you're talking about inclusiveness, but there were no pre-consultations. So the Europeans had their own hesitations to the project. The Australians, who sent a junior representative, they have been looking at it with a lot of, in fact, suspicion, thinking that this is a plan for a increased regional or a wider hegemony by the Chinese. So could India perhaps try and talk to these players to get along its concerns in a more strong sort of a way rather than taking China head on? Because at the end of the day today, India and China, in terms of trade, China is heavily invested into your economy, so much so it's the main official sponsor of the Indian cricket team while it was playing a match against Pakistan in the recent T20
said. So many, you'll have to actually look for new alliances, new partners when it comes to tackling China. But I'll come back to you, Ambassador Sharma. In fact, many have also called OBOR initiative of China as debt trap diplomacy. We'll have to see, China's investments, as many say, the sort of profits they look for. It's very different the way India invests in infrastructure projects in many of its neighboring countries. It's now time for me to take a short break. Next, when we come back, we'll also talk about the possibilities and the potential SCO has in countering terrorism, what India can achieve and how challenging it will be for India to tackle both China and Pakistan in SCO. We'll talk about that in our final segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. In the final segment, we are asking, will India's SCO membership test its equation both with China and Pakistan? Will SCO prove itself to be an effective platform in countering extremism, terrorism and separatism? Coming back to you, Ambassador Sharma, the big target, of course, is tackling terrorism. Do you think that SCO can actually prove itself to be an effective platform in dealing with terrorism?
It can, provided China and Pakistan, they come out of that little shell, because somehow the other Chinese have been taking a position on terrorism, but when it comes to Pakistan, they become defensive. And Pakistan has been, from the very beginning, from this even the International Convention on Terrorism, they have been stoutly opposed, and they have been actually getting the Arabs behind this, and they are trying to quarrel on definition of what is terrorism. So this remain a problem. However, on things like intelligence cooperation and working on against financing of terrorism and all these matters, SCO could be more effective than SAARC. Actually, SAARC also had a protocol against financing of terrorism, but the Pakistanis put it to rest in the sense that they did nothing on that. We had SAARC convention as old as '87 against terrorism, but the Pakistanis blocked it. Here they cannot block it because others are interested, especially Central Asian countries. They have a particular view of terrorism. They are scared. And Russia also has a particular view against terrorism. So there will be a little more pressure on them to work on terrorism. But I want to, since you asked me, I want to come back to the previous session. You know, this connectivity is a buzzword which has been blown beyond proportions. It was actually very relevant for situations like the subcontinent, where there was an economy which was flourishing till 1948 or till 65, and then it was cut asunder because of Cold War. And there was a whole heap of compatibilities there in this larger economy, and connectivity was one factor which would have united this. So ADB, for instance, came out with number of reports emphasizing connectivity. But that connectivity is something which was existing, and it's to restore it. Otherwise, I have seen socialist countries under the Soviet Union, I mean even the Cold War, Algeria, Iraq, roads, they were aplenty. They had railways aplenty. But when the economy went down, what would run on the road? So the roads are not a guarantee of development. You need to have more. And that's where the other issues come, the economy. The Chinese, they're large part of their trade. South Korea, Japan, USA, EU, India. These are the 5 partners of China, which South Korea is some $300 billion, Japan again upward of that, US $800 billion, EU. So Chinese economy has, and you ask each
so you're saying you'll have to go beyond connectivity.
They have a certain skepticism about China, each of them. So it's not that China can just trade through the world, like East India Company.
You cannot, the whole idea of China trading with the world cannot really be a reality, and there are substantial challenges to that. But Ambassador Sanwal, do you see a possibility or that potential in SCO to prove itself to be a very, very strong platform in dealing with terrorism?
Yes, I think so. I think so for the simple reason that Pakistan will find itself virtually isolated in this issue in that organization, because the Chinese are really concerned about their western region, which has Uyghurs are not part of the Han mainstream, and they have been experiencing acts of terrorism of people coming from the Pakistan side, the training camps just like us, and getting into as far as Russia and the Central Asian republics there. So Pakistan is going to find itself isolated. The second issue is that even though as a new entrant, India had no hand in the Astana Declaration, that declaration gives prominence to the UN Convention on Terrorism. So it was not something that India pushed, but it was something that is evolving in that organization because all the other people want it. And the third thing is that it's not just they're talking about terrorism, they're also talking about financing and drug flows. Now we are experiencing those problems as well, and we are recognizing now that to control terrorism in our own areas, the cross-border terrorism, we need to have a handle on both the drugs and the financial channels. Now here is another area where we can, I think, isolate Pakistan in a sense more effectively in the SCO on these issues than we were trying to do in other forums,
but
where we did not have others supporting us
that
uniformly.
India's SCO membership will also test its equations now, both with Pakistan and China.
No, you see, the China, I see after the Modi-Xi discussion in Astana, getting into a different track altogether, where they are looking at development goals, they are looking at elements of cooperation rather than elements where they disagree. And the elements of cooperation from the Chinese side, they have given reference to energy and railways. Prime Minister Modi has talked about investment, trade and connectivity. And the Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor, which is of great significance for us because it opens up the northeast, it opens up a door to Southeast Asia, which has a huge economic potential.
Okay,
so I see the trend of India-China getting out of the security network into the trade network, and that is going to be a more stronger bond.
Okay, I'm left with last 5 minutes, final comments on the program. What are really the challenges and the opportunities for India with this SCO membership?
Well, in terms of challenges, of course, it will be about trying to do that sort of, tightrope walking when you have Pakistan as a member as well within the SCO. How do you reconcile your differences when it comes to BRI with China? How do you play all the players together? Because at the end of the day, India is going on with military cooperation with America, which has a very, very unpredictable President Donald Trump, with whom we are expecting a very crucial meeting for Mr. Narendra Modi when he travels to Washington, D.C. later this month. And along the sidelines, of course, of the G20 summit, maybe another conversation. So how does India really go about this? Because the American pivot to Asia is changing. India also wants to make sure that it is its own player in this region. How does it's maintaining its relationship with Russia? So these changing dynamics are definitely going to prove a test. On terror, of course, the SCO summit does have a group called RATS, or the Regional Anti-Terror Structure, which is based out of Tashkent. But will India be able to drive home the point to China that, look, terror emanating from Pakistan is causing you worries? Recently, we saw reports of 2 Chinese nationals who had been abducted, who were killed in Pakistan, not the first of its kind. Even before the Lal Masjid operation, Chinese nationals had been abducted. But what was the reaction in China? China ensured that the news was not reported in its press, and Pakistan went ahead evacuating more Chinese nationals from the disturbed region. So how does India make the larger point of the threat of terrorism emanating from Pakistan and sell it across the board in SCO? It's going to be a challenge, but the opportunity definitely lies in, because there is so much of fluidity in global dynamics today, US still remains the superpower, but the power structures are changing. How do you find yourself not being out of the room, being a part of the decision-making process? That remains an opportunity.
Right, so changing regional dynamics will give an opportunity and of course can be a challenge for India. Final word from you, Ambassador Sonwal, in terms of risks that exist for India in SCO.
See, the risks are that we don't give it enough attention, because the problem that we have faced throughout in this region particularly is that we have come out with very good ideas. We have come out with ideas that find support in the other countries, but we don't follow up on them. So now it is for India to take the leadership in this organization. And India has the experience and the capacity to do so in terms of not only terrorism, but also the drug flows and the financing of terrorism. And I think they work with Russia to push the agenda of the SCO.
Okay, so take a leadership role, be a leader, and most importantly follow it up, because that has been a challenge with many of these multilateral institutions where India is, apart from membership. What role do you see for India in the SCO?
It gives us an opportunity to once again emphasize the points which are crucial to our international diplomacy. So, mercifully, happily, the declaration actually emphasizes those points like counter-terrorism and working against things like challenges which are there. Cyber terrorism, for instance. Cyber is one area where SCO could work together, because India, China, Russia can work together on cyber.
So a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, great areas of convergence also.
The important point is that the actual action will be bilateral. Multilateral organizations are very good as talk shops, but when actual action takes place, it is through bilateral routes.
Okay, so bilateral relations will define how well we do at a multilateral platform. Thanks very much, all of you, for joining us in this program. And that's all we have for you in this edition of Inside. Thanks very much for watching.